Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Monday, June 21st, 2021. And our top story today, we're breaking down data breaches in 2021. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Chris Novak. He is Global Director for the Threat Research Advisory Center at Verizon. Chris, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great. And I want to, I really enjoy having you on. I want to talk about cybersecurity, the threats that are out there that all organizations are really facing. So let's talk about the report that was just released. And what's the genesis of that report? That's something that you and the team at Verizon do on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's right. So actually, surprisingly, we've been doing that report now for 14 years, which is unbelievable to me. I was actually involved with the report from the very first version that we released back in 2008 and every one since then. It's been an exciting ride and interesting to see kind of how the threat landscape has developed. I say a lot of what we do in cyber, I draw a lot of analogies to kind of like healthcare. You're diagnosing problems, trying to figure out where the risks are, and then kind of almost like prescribing treatment plans or courses of action that organizations can take in order to kind of improve their cyber hygiene, much like you'd improve your own, health.
Yeah, absolutely. And, brush your teeth, floss, all those things.
Right.
We'll probably talk about those in other episodes of the show. But you're right. It absolutely is the right thing to do in terms of preventing these data breaches. And Chris, we've seen a lot of data breaches and privacy breaches. Not a lot, but we've seen a lot of awareness in the media. I point to the Colonial Pipeline. That's the big one that I think a lot of people are aware of. But when you reflect back on 2020, obviously a tumultuous event across the globe for health reasons, for financial reasons. How do you assess the privacy and cybersecurity threat difference between 2020 and perhaps other years?
Yeah, that's a great question. The interesting thing, as you pointed out, is, COVID had changed the landscape a lot for a lot of reasons, right? So, the healthcare piece is a whole nother conversation. But when you look at it from a cyber perspective, there were a lot of challenges there where you had many organizations moving from having most of their people in offices to working from home. And when I talk with a lot of executives at organizations that kind of went through that transformation, they'll say, they were amazed and pleased with their team's ability to make that happen and make it happen so quickly. But if you were to kind of ask them all honestly, if you were to plan to undertake an effort like that and actually make a shift where you said, hey, there's not a pandemic, we just want to move everybody work from home, most organizations would tell you that's a multi-year long effort to plan and do that, right? And most organizations that put that in place did it in days to weeks. And the challenge that presented from a security standpoint is you don't necessarily know where all these people are going. You don't know what computer systems people might have grabbed from their desk and brought home. And I don't mean anything malicious. In many cases, it was just, hey, I need to continue my work, so I'll grab my laptop or I'll grab my desktop or I'll grab this monitor or this USB drive. And assets are now moving all over the country, all over the world, and organizations struggle to keep track of what is legitimate movement of that. And then also the other piece of it is, you mentioned privacy. It's where is that data going and who has access to it? A lot of organizations are well positioned to secure what's in their building, kind of like a bank can secure the money in the vault much more easily than trying to secure money that's walking around on the street, because they can wrap security around it. As the moment we started moving everybody to work from home, that presents a lot of new challenges for organizations to figure out how do they secure the systems, how do they secure the employees, and how do they secure things like very sensitive data.
Yeah, and being a chief information and security officer, that has to be, it's a difficult job in general, because we'll talk about some of the threats in a minute. But you going through COVID and going through the pandemic, I mean, that really puts you at the fore. And given all the things that have happened with breaches, what we've been through, they're at the top of the food chain, probably reporting directly into the CEO, he or she, and providing them very important information and having to advise the organization on the right steps. That can't be easy either.
That's right. Yeah, and in fact, it's interesting because there's a lot of debate in the security community of where someone like that should report, because this is kind of a, I don't know if I want to say it's a new kind of risk. I feel like this is something I've been doing for a couple of decades. So for me, it's been around for a while, but for business in general, it's kind of a new kind of risk because most businesses looked at risk from the standpoint of natural disasters, my suppliers, my facilities, and now we have this concept of information risk where you look at organizations now when they do things like their annual reports, they have complete sections of their annual reports where they talk about the risk posed to their business or posed to shareholder value based on information security incidents. And so there's a lot of debate of, does a chief information security officer report into legal? Do they report into CFO? Do they report into the CEO? Are they dotted line to the board? There's a lot of organizations that are really kind of struggling back and forth to figure out how to make that work because the amount of risk posed to the business is ever increasing, and businesses are trying to find the right way to put the right amount of focus and attention on it, right? How do we show that we are making a real commitment to things like due care and due diligence and, protecting our employees and protecting our consumers. And also, COVID has had a dramatic impact on the kinds of threats that a chief information security officer team has had to face. I mean, for example, when we were looking at the report data, we looked at things like phishing attacks. When someone sends you an email trying to entice you to click on a link or open an attachment, then usually they're just have to steal your password to get access to your bank account or some other access, right? If you look at the terminology used in those kinds of attacks, those kinds of emails and communications in the last year, it was a complete sea change in terms of what security teams needed to be looking for. And even still today, right? Prior to COVID, you didn't see people trying to phish or send those kind of messages to people about using terms like face masks or vaccines or COVID testing or any of those kinds of things, because that wasn't even really something that we talked about. Now you look at the phishing emails that we see, and it was, there was a spike in phishing emails around how do you get masks. Then there was a spike in emails around unemployment claims and things like that. There's a tremendous amount of unemployment insurance fraud going on right now. And then you have a spike around, well, if you need a vaccine or want a vaccine, or then there's a lot of the political elements of it in terms of, do you get it? Do you not? Do you wear a mask? Do you not? And so generally speaking, in the security world, where we see that there is conflict in the greater world or strife or larger level catastrophes going on, that is almost always where the cyber criminal threat actors really just zoom in and try to use that to really kind of pull on people's emotions to get them to react without, essentially without thinking about it.
Chris, and I want to get to, maybe in the second segment, we'll talk about some solutions for businesses, for organizations. Let me ask you, let's end this segment with a couple thoughts from you on who's the most vulnerable. Is it the large organization, not-for-profit, government, corporation, or is it the smaller organization who doesn't have the resources? Or because there's a symbiotic relationship largely between large and small organizations, are they all just vulnerable, and that's just the way it's going to be?
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but unfortunately, it's probably mostly the latter of, all being vulnerable. And I don't mean to paint a grim picture there, but the reality of it is, as you pointed out as well, that, usually they're vulnerable for different reasons. When I talk to large organizations, the biggest challenge they have is they have so many people, right? Maybe tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people spread across hundreds of offices around the world. Trying to secure something that massive becomes very challenging, right? And one of the things we say in this security world often is, in order to defend against these kind of threats, we need to be right 100% of the time. The bad actors, they only need to be right once in order to get in. So the large organizations have that unique problem. And then typically the smaller organizations or your nonprofits, typically the challenge they have, and actually similar in education as well, is usually it's smaller footprint of an organization, but generally also they don't have the sizable security budget where that large organization may be spending hundreds of millions or even billions on security. Those smaller organizations or nonprofits, they may not even really have, quote, a security team. And so they face other challenges just by virtue of, having more limited resources.
Well, Chris, I need to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about what you could do and should do as a small or large organization with respect to cybersecurity. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're talking this morning to Chris Novak, who's the Global Director of the Threat Research Advisory Center at Verizon. Chris, thanks so much for staying with us this morning.
You bet.
So people armed with this report, it's a report that you've been putting out for over a decade now. It's about, I didn't read the whole thing, but I looked at it and paged through it just to get some high level. It's 119 pages. There's a lot of data there. What's your hope, you and the team's hope, in terms of what organizations can take away from this in terms of protecting themselves, protecting their employees, and by the way, protecting their consumers as well, their customers?
Yeah. So I think you make a key point there. There's a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals to protect. I think that the key thing that I always try to point out to people is, one, this is not a problem that can't be solved or can't be addressed, right? At the end of the day, there's a lot of things organizations can do to protect themselves and a lot of things that individuals can do to protect themselves. So when we hear in the news about all these big events that are happening, data compromised, ransomware, those are all bad. But there's a lot that we can do to minimize the likelihood of them happening to us. And then also, like anything, we can't entirely mitigate something 100%, right? We can't say this will never happen to us because we've done these 5 or 10 things, but we can lessen the likelihood that they occur, and we can lessen the impact when they do, so that if they do occur, it's like getting the cold versus something much more serious, right? And so, that's typically what we're wanting to try to do, is take a risk-based approach and strike the right balance for your organization in order to be able to address those issues.
And for consumers out there, I feel like we're all consumers, right? You're a consumer, I'm a consumer. We're all buying goods and services. We probably have numerous online accounts. Do we need to be as vigilant as the organizations that are protecting their infrastructure? Do we as consumers need to be, learned, get more skills when it comes to data privacy, and really keep our guard up and keep our ears in attention of what's happening around us.
Yeah, so I'm from New York. There's an adage that is painted on probably every bus and subway in New York City, and that is, if you see something, say something. And it's a good point from a security standpoint for cyber or your own personal information. It's essentially everyone needs to be on the lookout because everybody plays a role in security. If you're part of the security team of a business, then great, you have an identified role, a specific objective that you need to do. But if you're an individual or a consumer or just an end user employee in an organization, you should understand that you have a role to play as well, because the eyes and ears of security, just like the eyes and ears of, police, they can't be everywhere. They can't be all knowing, and they can't see everything, right? They don't have the ability to be everywhere all the time. So everyone needs to play a role. I would encourage everybody to read up on cybersecurity and information security. Challenge the people around you. Ask questions of the organizations that you work for as to, hey, this is something that has interested me. What is it that we're doing? And if there's a way for me to play a role, for most individuals, the simplest way for them to help their business is to be able to understand what a phishing email looks like and how they report it. That's probably the simplest way that a regular average Joe or Jane user can contribute to the security initiative. You see that email that looks a little bit off, there's a button you can click to report that to security. They can investigate it. And if it is actually a malicious message, they can actually pull it out of everybody's inbox. So your one notification may save hundreds, thousands, or millions of other people from being victimized. And I think the problem that we sometimes see with security is when people do things like that, they don't necessarily know that they've helped anybody. But I can assure you that it goes a long way to security research. So I'd say that's the by far the simplest way that you can plug in. But I'd also say learn more about your own information security. We actually released a companion report to the data breach investigations report. This was actually a number of years back. But if your audience goes and Googles for it, there's something called the Verizon Data Breach Digest. And it's an interesting kind of companion report that goes into different breach scenarios. And it's intended to be read by everybody, not just deep technical people, but really more of the layman, so that you can understand what role different people play in breaches, and kind of goes through maybe a little bit of war stories and scenarios, but really tries to help educate people on the why we do security, not just instructing them to do a lot of things.
Yeah, Chris, really good points. And one of the things here in the retirement industry that we deal with is paralysis by analysis. I mean, we're all very familiar. If you get a lot of data coming your way, and look, if you're selecting what funds are in your 401k, for your particular asset allocation, if you have too many funds, it just becomes too hard to evaluate. Is there risk here, or how do you mitigate the risk of paralysis by analysis, whether you are the chief information and security officer or whether you're someone like me who's a layperson who is bombarded every day, not just by phishing emails, but also information. And it's all good information. Sure. And figuring out how to take the appropriate steps.
Yeah, so you make a good point there. And I think, most chief information security officers are going to tell you they can never have enough information. In their world, it's all about let's get as much information as possible so we can try to correlate and find where there may be badness, even with just the smallest ounce of badness in the data. So they're typically looking for the most. I would say your end users or your individual consumers, generally there's a handful of kind of red flags that you're looking for, right? You're looking for, how do you turn on security on your accounts and enable it at a higher level? You mentioned retirements. That is a big target. A lot of individuals, and I see this all the time where the retirement account gets raided and they don't even realize that it happened. And then afterwards they go and they speak to, whoever it is that manages their 401k or their IRAs, only to find out there were options for them to enable things like two-factor authentication or account lockdowns or restrictions on money transfers or withdrawals. And for a lot of people, they didn't even realize that was an option they had to them. And in most cases, it's a free option. So there's little things like that really translate to the individual level where you can say, hey, how do I go in and enable all these other security settings? Because, I want to make sure that someone else can't access the funds in the account. Yeah,
really, really smart. And you should be aware of if you have a bank account, if you have a telecommunications account, to be aware of those protocols that are in place and things you can do. And that's really simple. You just log on, you check out your app, et cetera, to do that. Last question here, Chris, and there's so much more to unpack here, so we're not doing the topic justice, but we just have a finite amount of time. Let's talk about work from home, because you mentioned it at the top of the show. We never saw any of this coming. We had to, technical teams, businesses, organizations had to adjust on the fly. Now, some people are returning to work, but others, we're seeing a more of a hybrid approach. What about work from home? That obviously creates some level of vulnerability, but how can we protect ourselves as individuals and information security officers?
Yeah, so I think there's a handful of things there to keep in mind from work from home. One is, where possible, try to use a dedicated workspace. Try to not have the workspace commingled with personal space. And obviously, even more important extension of that is making sure that the resources you're using are dedicated to work. So you're not using a personal computer to do work or a work computer to do personal things, because we see a lot of crossover of, someone's personal system is not appropriately secured. They then use it for work. And now obviously work data becomes impacted or work infrastructure becomes impacted. So that's a key piece to it. And then ultimately, looking out for, are you connecting your work systems on the same Wi-Fi as your personal systems, things along those lines, and that is, I would say part and parcel to a lot of what we see is people commingling the assets. If you have the ability to isolate them or separate them, definitely do that. And then also making sure where possible that you're using things like a VPN. The VPN can help segment your traffic from your work traffic or vice versa in order to be able to limit the risk to yourself individually or your business. And in fact, it's interesting because a lot of times when we talk about security, it's typically from the standpoint of how does the business protect itself from everything else? But as an individual, you also want to make sure, hey, if your employer has a problem, you don't want that problem coming into your home environment and infecting your home PCs, right? We talk about, your retirement accounts or your brokerage's account or your bank accounts. If a problem at your office comes across your home network and infects your home PCs, it's also possible it affects your personal finances. So you need to be looking at all that as well. And then also I would say, looking at, if there are other people in the house, kids at home playing video games that are social media, there's a lot of other risks there to be concerned about. You want to see how that all mixes and matches. And then lastly, you want to look at the behavior of, how is it the employees are using their systems? And are you looking for things like, hey, when there is an incident, as a business, are you looking on the deep and dark web? When a malicious actor gets access to sensitive data, they go to essentially these black market websites to try to sell it. Now, what we help a lot of our customers with is actually going out there and looking for them and say, look, do we see any data that looks like company A or company B being sold in these black market websites? And if we do, we go back to company A or company B and say, hey, there may be a security incident. You may be leaking data somewhere because it appears that someone has access to it and they're trying to sell it on these black market websites.
Yeah, certainly a lot that goes on behind the scenes between organizations like a Verizon and other businesses to kind of connect the dots, things that we're not even aware at the general public level, and maybe we shouldn't be. Chris, it's great to talk to you as always. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow for another excellent episode of BRN AM. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.